I wanted to ask you, Caroline, about the two-part series of articles in Vanity Fair on Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, and the president's inner circle. I mean, clearly there was a lot of cooperation between the White House and Vanity Fair on this because there's numerous interviews that Susie Wiles had with the writer over the course of pretty much a year. Portraits were taken of his inner circle, including her, J.D. Vance, Stephen Miller. I mean, it looks like the White House was working hand in glove with Vanity Fair, and yet here's Susie Wiles' reaction to the series of articles. Quote, "The article published early this morning is a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. Significant context was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team." She goes on after that. You can read the full thing on X, but what happened? What went wrong?
Well, look, I would just echo my boss, Susie Wiles, who is the best chief of staff in our nation's history, working for the greatest president in our nation's history, and that this was, unfortunately, another attempt at fake news by a reporter who was acting disingenuously and really did take the chief's words out of context. But I think most importantly, the bias of omission was ever present throughout this story. The reporter omitted all of the positive things that Susie and our team said about the president and the inner workings of the White House. And as Susie said today, it's deeply unfortunate that happened, but it won't distract us.
What they don't understand is that Susie Wiles' own tweet confirms that what she said is true. She only says it was disingenuously framed, meaning the words themselves she said, but she disagrees with how they were framed throughout the article.
All right, everyone, we need to talk about the absolute disaster that just unfolded with Susie Wiles' Vanity Fair interviews, because the Trump White House is in full damage control mode, trying to spin what was clearly an on-the-record series of interviews where Wiles said the quiet parts out loud about Trump's alcoholic personality, Vance being an unprincipled conspiracy theorist, and Elon Musk being a drug user. And Caroline Leavitt's response is so absurdly propagandistic that it's actually painful to watch. Let me start with what happened. Vanity Fair published a two-part series of articles on Susie Wiles, the chief of staff, and the president's inner circle. Clearly, there was massive cooperation between the White House and Vanity Fair on this, because there are numerous interviews that Wiles had with writer Chris Whipple over the course of pretty much a year. Portraits were taken of the inner circle, including Wiles, J.D. Vance, and Stephen Miller. It looks like the White House was working hand in glove with Vanity Fair for this massive profile. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. And yet, here's Susie Wiles' reaction to the series of articles when they came out. The article published early this morning is a disingenuously framed hit piece on me and the finest president, White House staff, and cabinet in history. Significant context was disregarded, and much of what I and others said about the team and the president was left out of the story. I assume after reading it that this was done to paint an overwhelmingly chaotic and negative narrative about the president and our team. Notice what Wiles is saying. She's not saying she was misquoted. She's not saying the writer made things up. She's saying it was disingenuously framed, and that context was disregarded. That's an admission that she said all those things about Trump having an alcoholic's personality, about Vance being a conspiracy theorist for a decade, about Musk being a drug user. She just doesn't like how they were presented. So when reporters asked Caroline Leavitt about this, her response was absolutely North Korean state media level propaganda. Listen to this. Well, look, I would just echo my boss, Susie Wiles, who is the best chief of staff in our nation's history, working for the greatest president in our nation's history, and that this was, unfortunately, another attempt at fake news by a reporter who was acting disingenuously and really did take the chief's words out of context. But I think most importantly, the bias of omission was ever present throughout this story. The reporter omitted all of the positive things that Susie and our team said about the president and the inner workings of the White House. The best chief of staff in our nation's history? The greatest president in our nation's history? This is propaganda language. This is how state media in authoritarian countries talks about their dear leader. It's embarrassing. And Leavitt's claim that Wiles's words were taken out of context falls apart when you realize Wiles herself only claims the framing was disingenuous, not that she was misquoted or that her words were taken out of context. What they don't understand is that Susie Wiles's own tweet confirms that what she said is true. She only says it was disingenuously framed, meaning the words themselves she said, but she disagrees with how they were framed throughout the article. That's not a denial. That's an admission with a complaint about presentation. Caroline Leavitt immediately tries to spin this in North Korean news anchor style, but over on CNN, they were explaining how there's a chance Susie Wiles didn't even know this was an on-the-record interview. One CNN reporter said, "I cannot tell you how many conspiracy theories I've heard about how this interview got published. Whether it was the idea that she thought she was talking off the record, whether it was the idea that she was sitting for some kind of other interview that wasn't going to be published immediately, that it has something to do with the 2028 campaign. And because Susie Wiles is a calculated and political figure, everything she does has meaning. She is not somebody who seeks the limelight. She doesn't get out there in the press and do constant interviews. So the fact that she did this to so many people who are close to President Trump must mean something." But here's the thing. Chris Whipple, the writer of this article, isn't some random reporter. He's the most prominent historian of White House chiefs of staff dating back to the Nixon administration. He's talked to every single one. So he was clearly documenting Susie Wiles for the history of it. This wasn't some casual conversation. This was 11 on-the-record interviews over the course of a year with one of the most respected presidential historians alive. Wiles knew exactly what she was doing. Caroline Leavitt then continues to spin on the White House lawn about the Vanity Fair article. Susie Wiles was shockingly candid throughout it, and that's why the White House is reacting like this. For example, why was Susie Wiles so candid about Elon Musk's drug use? We know that Musk uses ketamine. He's admitted that he openly uses ketamine. It wasn't a secret, but the way Wiles worded it, basically saying he sleeps on a mattress in the office, he's hard to keep up with, he's always on ketamine, she said he's like an odd genius or whatever. I don't think Elon Musk is a genius, by the way. If you agree with that assessment, make sure you drop a like and subscribe. I think he's had a few successful businesses, but we can debate whether buying companies that other people built and then taking credit makes you a genius. But that's a conversation for another time. Leavitt was asked again about the Vanity Fair article and gave another scripted propaganda response. This is unfortunately another example of disingenuous reporting, where you have a reporter who took the chief of staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within, and then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present. Many people in this building spoke with that reporter, and those comments were never included in the story, probably because it didn't push this false narrative of chaos and confusion that the reporter was clearly trying to push. I'm sorry, but we didn't get Elon Musk's opinion on whether or not he was high on ketamine throughout his slashing of USAID, which resulted in aid cuts that will kill hundreds of thousands of people through lost humanitarian assistance. That seems relevant. Susie Wiles was accidentally super candid about how USAID was super important, and now they're trying to walk that back too. Then Leavitt goes back into full propaganda mode. Not just myself, but also the entire cabinet in a groundswell of support from people on Capitol Hill who don't even work in this building about how incredible Susie Wiles has been to President Trump, and he's been able to accomplish so much because of his leadership and his tenacity, but also because of Chief of Staff Wiles's leadership and her ability to effectuate his agenda. This is scripted propaganda. This is talking points designed to present a false reality where everything is perfect and anyone criticizing the administration is fake news. It's Orwellian. It's important to note that the Vanity Fair article burned Caroline Leavitt pretty badly personally. The article had close-up photos of Trump admin members, and they led with one of Leavitt that seems to show lip injection marks. Now, honestly, I'm not one to judge. Do whatever you want with your appearance. You can affirm the way you look in any way that you want. Just don't judge other people all the time for being who they want to be, Caroline. That's what I would say at the end of the day. But clearly, Leavitt felt personally attacked by that photo choice. Then Caroline was asked about Donald Trump's White House address scheduled for tomorrow. And I have a thought. Trump could troll the entire nation during his address tomorrow if he just randomly resigned. How much would liberals be owned? How owned would we all be if Donald Trump just resigned? No, don't do it, Trump. Don't. Please don't resign. I would be so owned if you quit. When asked what the address will be about, Leavitt gave the most scripted, propagandistic response imaginable. We greatly look forward to President Trump addressing the nation tomorrow night, 9 Eastern. I hope your audience will tune in and Americans across the country will tune in to hear from their president as well about the historic accomplishments that he has garnered for our country over the past year. If you look at the security of our border, if you look at stopping Joe Biden's inflation right in its tracks, bringing down gas prices to the lowest level in 5 years, President Trump will be talking about what's to come. The best is truly yet to come, as he often says. This is so scripted, so legitimately propagandist, that it's almost parody. She's reciting talking points that have no connection to reality. Gas prices aren't at the lowest level in 5 years. Inflation hasn't been stopped in its tracks. The border isn't more secure. These are lies, and Leavitt delivers them with the enthusiasm of a North Korean state broadcaster, praising the dear leader. Maybe we should do a counter live stream tomorrow. While Donald Trump is spewing all of his lies, we don't even watch his lies. We go watch some Rob Reiner best moments from his movies. We do some political research. We actually focus on reality. The nation should not be watching Trump as he spews his repetitious lies that I can probably guess before he even goes on stage. He's going to say that Joe Biden handed him an awful economy and the country was going to hell, according to people like Vladimir Putin and Viktor Orban. And now the country has been revived even though people don't feel it yet. The economy is an A++++, but also affordability is a con job. But also the economy is in a golden age, but also we still have a ways to go. His same repetitious lies where he's clearly gaslighting everyone. Caroline Leavitt is one of the biggest purveyors of these same exact lies, and it's crazy how much this Vanity Fair article burned her. The article asks, "What do you notice about this close-up of Trump's press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, from Vanity Fair?" And people noticed. The internet noticed, and Leavitt is clearly upset about it. But let's get back to the substance of why the White House is in full panic mode. The Susie Wiles interviews exposed things that Trump and his team desperately wanted to keep hidden. Trump having an alcoholic's personality and believing he can do anything without limits. Vance being an unprincipled conspiracy theorist who faked his conversion for political gain. Vaught being a right-wing zealot. Musk being a drug user with massive government authority. And most importantly, Wiles admitting that Trump's prosecutions of his enemies are vindictive retribution. That last part is legally significant, when Wiles admits on the record that the Letitia James case is retribution, that the Comey case looks vindictive, and she can't tell you why you shouldn't think that Trump seizes opportunities for revenge when they present themselves. She's handing Trump's enemies the evidence they need to prove abuse of power. Leavitt's propaganda response can't change what Wiles said. Calling it fake news doesn't make the quotes disappear. Claiming context was missing doesn't explain away Wiles describing Trump's personality as alcoholic or admitting his prosecutions are retribution. These are Wiles's words on the record in 11 separate interviews over a year with one of the most respected White House historians alive. The White House strategy is classic authoritarian playbook. Deny, attack the messenger, claim victimhood, insist everything is perfect, and anyone saying otherwise is lying. But it doesn't work when the person saying these things is Trump's own chief of staff in interviews she clearly agreed to participate in for nearly a year. And the fact that Caroline Leavitt has to go out there and call Susie Wiles the best chief of staff in our nation's history, working for the greatest president in our nation's history, shows how desperate they are. That's not normal political spin. That's state propaganda language. That's how you talk about dear leader in a totalitarian regime, not how you describe public servants in a democracy. The Vanity Fair articles are devastating because they come from inside the House. This isn't the media attacking Trump. This is Trump's own chief of staff, in her own words, describing an administration characterized by Trump's limitless ego, Vance's opportunism, Vaught's zealotry, Musk's drug use, and systemic vindictive retribution against enemies. and all Caroline Leavitt can do is stand at a podium and recite propaganda talking points about how perfect everything is. Tomorrow, Trump will give his address, and he'll lie about the economy being perfect while people struggle with prices. He'll lie about the border being secure while families are torn apart. He'll take credit for things he didn't do and blame others for his failures. And Caroline Leavitt will stand at that podium the next day praising him as the greatest president in history while calling any criticism fake news. But Susie Wiles' interviews are out there. The quotes are documented. The admissions about Trump's personality and the retribution agenda are on the record, and no amount of propaganda from Caroline Leavitt can make that disappear. The chief of staff told us exactly who Trump is and what this administration is about. We should believe her. If you appreciate these videos breaking down the propaganda and exposing the truth, drop a blue heart. Let me know you made it to the end. We've got a lot of cool projects coming out that you won't want to miss. Subscribe so you don't miss any of it.